Um, as Natan said, really, Baruch Hashem, that we have a Matir Asurim, and this couple is back in Israel. Hopefully, it will be the last time that something like that happens. So what I would like to do today is to have a little bit of understanding, especially in Sefer Bereshit, when there is so much talk about the biblical figures and the biblical heroes, because really Sefer Bereshit is a book of stories about our Avot and our Imahot, about Adam Arishon, Chava, Cain, Hevel, Noach, Esav. We have so many biblical figures, and sometimes when we learn the narrative, there are different aspects and different perspectives on the figures themselves. Sometimes we criticize what they did or what they didn't do. Sometimes we criticize the characteristics. And the question is obviously, how do we view critique or criticism on those biblical figures? How do we need to approach it? What are the different views about it? And where we can find ourselves in doing so. So let's see something from the 30s. Here we go. So this was a protest by Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Zichrono Livracha, against the trivialization and assassination of the Avot in Chumash Motis, on ongoing newspaper series. This essay appeared in the Warsaw, the Jewish, it's a Poland only religious daily newspaper, 13 Nisan, 1935. So I'm taking you back to the 1935, where Rabbi Aaron Kotler probably was told, or maybe he himself read in the newspaper, a series of articles, basically not exactly flattering the Avot, and he was upset, saying the least. So take a look at what he says. It was recently shown, the last few issues of the newspaper, how shocked I was to see the terrible blasphemy and the violation of the sanctity of our holy Avot and Imaot that they contained. The laws of our holy Torah obligate me to reach to this unheard of profanation of truth, Chilul Shem Shamayim, and violation of the dignity of the Jewish nation. I thus feel compelled to depart from my usual practice and to issue the following public statement. So just to create the background, 1935, Poland, not everyone is as religious as we think he is. There is obviously a lot of haskala, and there is what we call Chokhmat Israel, and we have people criticize, people coming up with new ideas and all sorts of things. And this series of articles in that newspaper basically got Rabbi Aaron Kotler to do two things. A, to basically address the issue, but B, to address it publicly, because he felt it's a Chilul Shem Shamayim. Now, don't forget, this newspaper found itself in many of the Jewish families' homes. Okay, it's not that it was just in the street. Rabbi Aaron Kotler saw in front of him a terrible disaster. Those newspapers comes into the Jewish homes, even religious Jewish homes, and obviously they affect and they impact the children, the parents. So obviously you understand the threat that he felt. So he said the following: the Holy Forefathers, who were the most luminous, loftiest, and purest personalities, the holiest creatures, represent the foundation of eternal spiritual vitality, the wellsprings of chesed and the full range of positive attributes for the entire world. For all mankind, the Avot are, in fact, held in the highest esteem by every nation on earth. The worst enemies of the Jews did not dare tamper with their luminous and holy image. Now, first and foremost, when we see that, again, 1935, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, there are few issues that obviously we can have with this statement. A, it's not that true that all the nations never tampered with the Avot. We know already in the time of the Gemara that they used to mock Yaakov. Especially later on, the Christians did not like Yaakov. They respected Abraham and Yitzhak because it really fitted into their religion. But Yaakov was not their favorite. That's one. B, what he does in order to protect the Avot and the Imaot from the criticism that he saw, he basically put them on a pedestal, which we should have an issue with. Not because they were not righteous, or not, God forbid, because they were not pure and holy and pious, but because if you portray them as such holy people, basically flawless people, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, so what can I learn from them? I'm not flawless. I have issues. So how can I learn from someone who is flawless when I have my own faults? Which means by trying to protect them, he makes them saints. And that's obviously going to be an issue. And we will see later on how his opinion was criticized as well. Everyone is with me before I continue on? Just nod your head or, okay, good. So Rabbi Aaron Kotler continues on and he says, how deep the shame and how profound the anguish then that this despicable blasphemy should appear in a Yiddish so-called nationalistic paper. Worse yet is the shame that this very newspaper, which compromises every principle for financial gain, did not realize that its violation of the dignity of the Avot would arouse protest from its broadest circle of readers. You understand, this newspaper had a tremendous broad circle of readers, which include religious observant families. And that's why Rabbi Aaron Kotler sees this criticism obviously as a threat on Judaism. This protest, besides courtling this outrage, also serves as a source of encouragement to the religious community. Did the publishers really expect people to ignore such deformation of the Creator, His Torah, and the Holy Avot, who form the very basis for the continued existence of Klal Israel? The worst victims of this betrayal are our youth, for whom these stories are an insidious venom which can poison their entire way of thinking, especially in this era of widespread ignorance, when so many young people are not even vaguely familiar with what is the Chumash writes about the Holy Forefathers, and certainly do not know that Chazal say about them. They will instead learn about the Avot from a Hain's perspective, cued from the Chumash motives, which are permeated with cynical ridicule and the spirit of the Yevesitzka, the Jewish communist division. Ooh, so you can understand, in 1935, by the way, and maybe I'll just take a side note, that Bezrat Hashem in May, if everything is going well, our shul will go on a mission to Poland. We'll encourage everyone to join us, if Bezrat Hashem, COVID permitted and everything else. But the first day we go to Warsaw and we go to the cemetery there, and you see, by the cemetery, you see how many different factions and fractions were in Poland. You have the Maskilim, and you have the Hasidim, and you have the Mitznagdim, and you have the theater people. And basically Poland was an incredible city in terms of culture, religion, and everything else. And you see that everyone was involved with each other. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler feels that this newspaper is going to create a tremendous disaster to the observant families. This magazine goes into every home. And don't forget, there's no Instagram, there's no Facebook, there's no email. People read newspapers and they read it all. They don't read only the section that they like, sports or something else. They read everything. So they're going to read what this newspaper has to say about the Avot and the Imaot. So Rabbi Aaron Kotler says, shame on you. You're going to educate the youth who doesn't know much, and they're going to learn from this newspaper, and their perception on the Avot is going to be totally skewed. So Rabbi Aaron Kotler says, shame on you. This is unaccepted, and we shouldn't ever criticize anything that the Avot or the Imahot did. That's 1935. We'll see that obviously other people have different opinions. And then it says, every Jew possessing spark of faith, to whom the honor of Klal Israel dear, is thus forbidden to allow such heretical writings, which the Rambam deems worse than idolatry, to enter his home. So as not to transgress, you shall not bring anything despicable into your home. So here is the first BDS, not their BDS, our BDS. Basically, Rabbi Aaron Kotler says, no more magazines. It's very similar to the New York Times, I think, or CNN. But basically, Rabbi Aaron Kotler says what? He says, no more newspapers like that in your home. It's forbidden from the Torah, from the Pasuk, Lo tavi to'eva el beitecha. You should not bring something that is abominable into your home. I mean, look how he viewed it, which is incredible because we know that in 1935 in Poland, observant families definitely faced tremendous challenges and issues with Moderna. By the way, not too much change. So let's continue. It says it must be emphasized. The Torah law considers whoever reads this newspaper culpable as an accessory to a transgression. For this travesty is written in and published with the reader in mind. Every Jew must spare his household from the destructive influence of such literature. Moreover, if we continue to tolerate such falsehoods in our homes, how can we continue to beseech God to answer our prayers in the merit of the very same avot and imaot that this comments malign or something like that? I can't really see here. Understandably, it is impossible to fully convey even one of the merit facets of this subject in the confines of a letter. This inadequacy on our part, however, does not give us license to remain completely silent either. I appeal to the Rabbonim, to the Geonim, to the Talmidei Chachamim, as well as to the ordinary God-fearing Jews, to protest this sacrilege as strongly as possible. Who knows but what our previous silence on other matters of outrage caused this present outrage to take place. May Hashem heal the breaches within his people and rebuild its spiritual wounds. Signed, Aaron Kotler, Rosh Metivta of Kletsk, who writes these words and signed them, grieving over the shame inflicted on the Torah and the people of Israel. So first, I just want to give credit to Rabbi J.J. Schechter, who sent me this article many years ago, because I don't have an access to 1935 Yiddish newspapers. But today I can get it online, but back then I didn't. So first, credit, Mevi Geula La'olam. But now I want us to think about Rabbi Aaron Kotler. And by the way, when you think about it, it can also explain to us little bit of the threat that sometimes we hear or we sense or we feel from, let's call it the Haredi camp. The idea of a threat that someone can influence, shape, form the youth's mind and perspectives on matters that for them are crucial, it's a threat. So Rabbi Aaron Kotler does what he didn't do for many years. He goes out in a public statement and basically says, if you are a God-fearing person, just a regular Jew, if you are Rabbonim, Geonim, Talmidei Chachamim, whatever, you must not bring this newspaper home. It's forbidden, it's a to'eva, it's abomination. And why? Because of the criticism on the avot. Now, by the way, just as we say in Hebrew, gilui naot, I just want to be very honest, I did not see what exactly was written on the avot and the imaot back then that really created this outrage. I assume that it's not even 10% of what we know today about biblical criticism and all sorts of opinions on biblical figures. That would be my assumption. So you can imagine if Rabbi Aaron Kotler would be alive today, what kind of letters and statements he would issue. So by now, according to Rabbi Aaron Kotler, it seems to be that the avot and the imaot, now I leave politics out, now let's focus, and again, focus on what? On the issue itself. According to Rabbi Aaron Kotler, there is no way to criticize the avot and the imaot. They are the purest, they are the most righteous, they are the most pious people. They are flawless, and basically any criticism on this image is blasphemy. Okay. Everyone is, I just want to check, everyone understand what Rabbi and Kotler said, and we also understand the mania, the reason for this. Okay, so now let's show perhaps something else. That's, by the way, from the Jewish Observer, March 1999. So take a look here. We see that there are different opinions. For example, בראשית פרק י"ב. ויהי רעב בארץ, וירד אברהם מצרימה לגור שם כי כבד הרעב בארץ. So there was a ra'av, there was famine, and Abraham went down to Mitzrayim to dwell there because the famine was too harsh. ויהי כאשר הקריב לבוא מצרימה, so when he got closer to Mitzrayim, ויאמר שרה אשתו, he says to his wife Sarah, הננה ידעתי כי אישה יפת מראה. I know that you are a beautiful woman. והיה קראו אותך המצרים, and when the Egyptians will see you, ואמרו אשתו זאת, they will say, this is his wife, והרגו אותי, and they will kill me. ואותך יחיו, and your life will be spared. אם רינה אחותי את, so please say that you are my sister, למען ייטב לי בעבורך וחייתה נפשי בגללך. So my life will be spared, and I will remain alive thanks to you. Okay, take a look at the Ramban. Now, before I will show you the Ramban Nachmanides, 13th century, obviously you cannot be suspicious that he wanted to blaspheme or to say anything of that sort on the Avot or the Imaot. He was one of the greatest Parshanim of the Torah, obviously of the Talmud as well. He was a doctor, he was a physician, he was a great commentator, he was a Baal Kabbalah, Baal Halacha, everything, all the good midot. And take a look what the Ramban says. The Ramban says the following, and it says like that, Veda, and you should know, Ki Avraham Avinu, that Avraham chata chet gadol bishgaga. He committed a great sin by mistake. What was the great sin that he did? Shehevi ishto atzadeket, that he brought his righteous wife, bemichshol avon, with basically to stumble into unintentionally. Mipnei pachado pen yargu. He was afraid that he will be killed because of her, so he asked her A, to lie for him, and B, he put Sarah in a very dangerous situation. Why? Because the fact that Paro took her, it might be that he will never give her back. He might, God forbid, he might rape her, he might take her. So he basically put his wife in danger for his own sake. So what should he have done? היה לו לבטוח בשם שיציל אותו ואת אשתו ואת כל אשר לו. He should have trusted God that he will save him and his wife and everything that he had. כי יש באלוקים כוח לעזור ולהציל. Because God has the power to save and to protect you. גם יציאתו מן הארץ, also. The fact that Avram left the country because of the famine, שנצטווה עליה בתחילה מפני הרעב, avon asher chata. This is another sin that he committed. כי האלוקים ברעב יפדנו ממוות. ועל המעשה הזה, and because of what Avram did, נגזר על זרעו הגלות בארץ מצרים ביד פרעה. Because of that, God punished Avram's descendants, and he sent them to galut in Egypt, במקום המשפט, שמה מקום הרשע. So, take a look at it. According to the Ramban, how many chataim Avraham committed? Two. So just in one case, Avraham committed 2 chataim. 1, endangering his wife. B, leaving Israel. Now, I am not going to deal with what the Ramban, basically what the Ramban suggested that Avraham should have done, which was to trust in God. Because that's a problem for us. What does it mean? There is famine in the land, and Abraham should just stay and wait that God will sustain him. So I'm not getting into the interpretation of the Ramban, because this shiur is just focused on how should we perceive our biblical figures. Okay, so that's why I'm not going to go astray and to try to explain the Ramban. I want to focus on what the Ramban said. He basically said, Avraham chata chet gadol, a grievous sin, tremendous sin, by endangering his wife in order to save his own life. B, by leaving Israel because of the famine. after God told him that that's going to be your land, that's another sin. So what do you think Rabbi Kotler will say to the Ramban? Okay, so obviously I think Rabbi Kotler is not going to stand up against the Ramban, but I want to pause here and to re-emphasize or focus in on the mania, again, the reason behind something. The Ramban, who lived in the 13th century, first in Spain and then later on, not in Spain, sorry, in France, and then later on, he went to Israel. So he lived in a time where biblical interpretation was a widespread phenomena, not only in the Jewish community, but also in the non-Jewish community, in the Christian community. They talked about the narrative. I'm not talking about talking together, but each one of them studied the narrative. And when he saw that some of the biblical heroes did something that he didn't think they were right, he criticized them. He highlighted the issue. And why? Because there is a fundamental difference between the Ramban's time and Rabbi Aaron Kotler's time. The Ramban's time, the only option for you as a Jew is within the Jewish community. You are protected. You don't know a lot about what's going on in the Christian community. And basically, it's all from within. In 1935, that's already obviously after emancipation, and after the other two streams of Judaism were being formed and shaped and took I would say even a charge on a growing section of the Jewish community, of the Jewish people. Basically, as a Jew, now you form your opinions not only based on what your Rabbi in the shtetl says. There is a magazine, there is a newspaper, there is a friend who is a maskil who goes to coffee with you and he starts telling you about what he heard and his thoughts, which I am going to say it now and I'm going to repeat it through the shiur, which, by the way, the lessons for the 21st century are tremendous. More you feel threatened, more paralyzed cognitively you are. You're with me? More threatened you feel as a religious Jew, more intellectually paralyzed you are. You are more afraid to think widely. You are more afraid to think out of the box, because everything that it does not fit exactly the box, it's a threat. Faster, quicker we understand it, we can understand where each group comes from and what are the reasons and how to talk to them. Everyone is with me? I think that was a really, if I should finish the shiur now, that will be the most important sentence I will say this hour. So I will repeat it one more time. More threatened you feel, or your perception is about your relationship vis-a-vis the outside world, more paralyzed cognitively you are. And you become more obsessed with what you have, and also try to basically to pile up all sorts of stories or other things in order to basically make your heroes saints. And that's, again, I'm not criticizing it, I'm just bringing it here, and we can obviously talk about it later on. So that's the Ramban. So the Ramban definitely didn't think like Rabbi Aaron Kotler. He might change his mind in 1935, I don't know. But definitely the Ramban highlighted two sins and two sins that he thought that Avram committed, with no questions, no too much of thinking. He basically said, okay. So now let's take a look at Bereshit Rabbah. Bereshit Rabbah, this is a Midrash Haggadah from the 5th century, 4th century, that was composed in Israel. And it says like that, ולאברהם היטיב בעבורה, ויהי לו צאן ובקר, ויצב עליו פרעה אנשים וישלחו אותו. So after Paro released Sarah, so he gave her a lot of flock, and he gave it to Abraham, and he gave him sheep and cattle and all of that. And Paro basically commanded him, go away, don't stay here. רבי פנחס בשם רבי יושעיה רבא אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא לאברהם אבינו, Hashem says to Abraham, say, go out, וכבוש את הדרך לפני בניך. So you go ahead and basically pave the path in front of your children. את מוצא שכל מה שכתוב באברהם, you see that everything that it says about Abraham, כתיב בבניו. It also says the same thing about his children, like מעשה אבות, סימן לבנים. Whatever happened to our אבות, happened to the children. באברהם כתיב, ויהי רעב בארץ. בישראל כתיב, כי זה שנתיים הרעב בקרב הארץ. So like Abraham had to deal with famine, also Yaakov and his children had to deal with famine. באברהם כתיב, וירד אברהם מצרימה לגור שם. Abraham went down to Mitzrayim to dwell there. ובישראל, with the Jewish people, it says, וירדו אבותינו מצרימה. So our fathers also went down to Mitzrayim. באברהם כתיב, לגור שם. Abraham also went to dwell in מצרים. ובישראל כתיב, לגור בארץ בנו. You see, לגור and לגור, same thing. באברהם כתיב, כי כבד הרעב בארץ כנען. With Abraham it says that the famine was really hard. בישראל כתיב, והרעב כבד בארץ. And with the Jewish people it says that the famine was very heavy. באברהם כתיב, ויהי כאשר הקריב. Okay? And with Abraham it says when he came closer to מצרים. בישראל כתיב, ופרעה הקריב. Again, פרעה came closer to them. באברהם כתיב, והרגו אותי ואותך יחיו. With Abraham it says, and they will kill me and they will let you live. ובישראל כתיב, כל הבן הילוד היורה תשליכו. Okay, so they go on and on and on and on about it. And basically, it says what? We'll continue on. באברהם כתיב, אמרי נא אחותי עד למען ייטב לי בעבורך. So with Abraham it says, please say that you are my sister, so I will get the benefit. בישראל כתיב, ויתב אלוקים למילדות. And Hashem gave benefits to the midwives. So why did I bring this midrash? Because basically this midrash takes a look. You know what? I'll ask you the question. According to the midrash basically says whatever happened to Abraham happened to the Jewish people. Why did I bring you this midrash? Because it's about the same issue that Abraham went down to Mitzrayim. What is the view of the midrash on Abraham's decision to go down to Mitzrayim? A negative one or a positive one? And please explain when you say negative or positive. What do you think? I'll bring it again. I'll bring the source sheet again so you can see the midrash. There you
go. Clearly negative, that it was being punished. The problems in Mitzrayim were midah kedeged midah.
It was very hard to hear, and I don't know who he is.
No, it's Larry.
Oh, Larry. Okay, yes. What did you say?
The problems that we suffered in Mitzrayim were midah kedeged midah, to what Abraham had done.
Okay, so one option is to see it as a negative, and whatever happened to Abraham also happened to us. That's one way to look at it. On the other hand, if there is another way to see this midrash.
Well, the midrash starts out by quoting a verse that is very positive with regard to Abraham. So that's how the midrash begins, and then it goes on to elaborate on that. So I'm sure I would agree that it's a negative point of view.
Okay, Harold, I'm going to be with you this time. And okay, Phil?
I think it's just accurate. It's neither positive nor negative. This is what happened.
Yeah, but when I look, I agree. That's exactly what happened. So they basically say, look, there was an action here, or there was something that happened to Abraham, and that's the same thing happened to Am Yisrael. But my question was, what's the midrash perspective on what Abraham did by making a decision to go down to Mitzrayim because of the famine? Answer: the midrash sees it as there is no problem with it. There is no chet. Abraham saw that there is famine. He went down to Mitzrayim. Basically, unlike the Ramban in the 13th century that criticized Abraham for making a decision to go down to Mitzrayim and to endanger his wife, the Midrash sees it as a decision that a person did, nothing to do with chet or not chet. It's not a sin or it's not a transgression. It's a decision that he made. And it's positive because at the end of the day, something good came out from it, which means when I look at what Abraham did, meaning leaving Israel, A, B, endangering his wife as a result of it, going to Mitzrayim, I can see it in a positive way, I can see it in a negative way, or maybe feel, I can even say, in an indifferent way. He did what he did. I'm not going to say it's a chet or not chet, it's a decision that he made, and then there are consequences for that decision. He made a decision, which means the point that I wanted to bring from this midrash is what? Is to say that none of these sources, the midrash or obviously the Ramban, do not look at what Abraham did and say, oh my gosh, that's the best thing ever. Because it might not be the best thing ever. Okay, meaning Rabbi Aaron Kotler says when they do something, when the forefathers do something, oh my gosh, this is the most pious, most righteous thing that they ever did. The Midrash looks at that and says, they did what they did, and as a result, Maseh Avot Siman Labanim, that's what happened to him, that will happen to us. Ramban, for example, says that was wrong. But none of them say, oh, that was the best decision ever, that was influenced by the divine inspiration. Not at all. Faggy.
Yeah.
Take it to your hand. Yes.
But yes, it is. But basically, aren't we supposed to help ourselves before we count on a nest from Hashem?
So, Faggy, that's what I said, that I don't want to deal with. That's what the Ramban issue. The Ramban basically said that Abraham committed a sin because he should have trusted God more. And I said at the beginning that I don't want to deal with it because that's not the subject matter for the shiur. The subject matter for the shiur is, can we criticize, or should we criticize, or how can we criticize the Avot and the Imaot or other biblical figures? I agree 100%, Faggy, with what you said. This Ramban is a very challenging Ramban because it seems to be, according to the Ramban, Abraham should sit down, pray, and wait for God to help him, which we know will never happen. God does not want us to do it. So how do we understand the Ramban? That will be a different shiur, perhaps, about what does it mean to have bitachon b'Hashem. But regarding our issue, just the point of the Midrash was, none of them celebrate that decision. It's a decision that was made, does not mean anything about their piousness or righteousness or whatever it is. It's just a decision that he made. That's it.
It's factual.
So now,
But it doesn't think about the basic premise. And the basic premise is to try and help yourself first. So that seems to be not considered.
I agree 100%. The Ramban disagree with that. And why the Ramban disagree with that? And why did he think that Abraham had to wait for God to give him directions and guidance? That will be an additional shiur B'ezrat Hashem. So take a look now at Rabbeinu Bachya, who was also around the same time of the Ramban. And he says the following, Imrina achoti at. So please say that you are my sister, right? When Abraham said, Lefi dat Raboteinu Zal, according to our sages in Gemara in Nedarim, Haya galut Mitzrayim bachet she'amar bama eda ki yirashena. שכן אמרו במדרש, הוא אמר במה עדה, והקדוש ברוך הוא אמר לו, ידוע תדע. So first and foremost, he says that our sages declared that the galut in Mitzrayim, that our exile in Egypt, was a result of Avram's sin when Hashem told him that he is going to give him the land and he's going to give him a child. When Avram says, Bama eda ki yirashena, how would I know that I will inherit the land? And then the Midrash says, you are asking me? I told you that I will give you the land. You are questioning me? You want proof? Your descendants are going to suffer in Egypt first. ונראה מזה שחשבו לחטא, or you see from the fact that they consider that as a חטא, ומכל מקום בין לדעת רבותינו ז"ל ובין לדעת הרב, הכל היה חטא הדיבור, ועליו נענשו בגלות מצרים 430 שנה. So Rabbeinu Bachya said something which is very interesting. According to the Ramban, What is the reason for the Jews to be enslaved in Mitzrayim? What was the ches that caused it?
Endangering Sarah and going down out of Eretz Yisrael.
Ephemeral, Danny. So according to the Ramban, the reasons for the Jews to be enslaved in Mitzrayim were two. One, leaving Israel to Mitzrayim, that endangering his wife. According to the Midrash that Rabbeinu Bachya brings, what is the reason for the Jewish people to be enslaved in Mitzrayim? The fact that Abraham questioned God. Bama eda ki irashena. He basically, after God told him, I'm going to give you the land, he says, how would I know that you're going to give me the land, that I'm going to inherit the land? But Hashem says, what, you're questioning me? Oy vavoy. So the descendants are going to be punished. By the way, for Fegi, there is another question here. Avraham committed a sin, so the descendants needs to be punished. Again, I'm not dealing with it. That's what it's very hard for me not to, but I'm not going to, because this is not the subject matter of the shiur, and I don't want to go astray. So the thing is that according to this midrash, the reason for being enslaved in Mitzrayim is different than what the Ramban suggested. So Rabbeinu Bachya look at the contradiction, and he says, you know what? It might be different reasons, but the common denominator is what? I would say, he says, achet haya badibur, meaning the way Avram spoke. He spoke without enough trust in God, without too much faith in God, meaning the idea is that Avram used his speech in an inappropriate manner. Let's see the Rabbeinu Bachya again. He says, Umikol makom. Here, the common denominator of the views expressed by our sages is that the sin consisted thoughts which Abraham articulated the results with 430 years of exile of varying degrees of severity, which means the common denominator is thoughts that Abraham had that he expressed in an inappropriate manner for his level. And this is where the hadgasha is, the emphasis, which means basically Abraham said something that we would expect him not to say. Now, I want to focus on one issue that I have with Rabbeinu Bachya. But before I do it, everyone understood what Rabbeinu Bachya said? Okay. The problem that I have with it is that I might understand the reason that Abraham challenged God, that that's an inappropriate thought. Hashem comes to you and say, I'm going to give you the land. What should you say? Thank you very much, I appreciate it. Instead, Abraham says, how would I know that I will inherit it? Okay, that I understand that that's a problem. But the Ramban reasons are not so much thoughts that were inappropriate, quote unquote, but rather it was a decision that he made. And I don't expect Abraham to just sit in the land of Israel and wait for God to give him manna and to sustain him. There is famine. He made the decision to go down to Egypt. So the issue that I have with Rabbeinu Bachya is a little bit the idea of that you cannot really compare both sins. However, the common denominator is that Rabban, Rabbeinu Bachya all criticize what Abraham did. And I don't care from whatever perspective, his thoughts, his actions, his decisions. Basically, we see the 13th century great commentators on the Torah looked at what Abraham did and criticized it. Now, I want to suggest something. Phil, I'll take you in a minute. I just want to suggest something before we move forward. When I say that I can criticize the biblical figures, does not mean that I diminish them. Does not mean that I now start to disrespect them. It does not mean that I'm going to say now, if Abraham did that, so I can do whatever I want. No. I am talking about at least two types of criticism. What I will call textual criticism, meaning the text is there and I criticize the text, A. B, criticism for me to learn from, not for the sake of criticism, to basically create sect religion and to try to show, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rachel, they were like us. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about criticism that shows that they were not flawless, so therefore I can learn from them. Therefore, I can try to imitate them because I know that they were also struggling and were challenged with all sorts of things. Meaning, if I want to relate to someone, I need to know that I can truly relate to him. So, in my opinion, when we think about the Ramban, Rabbeinu Bachya, you cannot even think for a second that after they said what they said, that Avram chata, that they think, oh, Avram is a chote, chas v'shalom. He was a righteous person. He tried to aspire for greatness, but on the way, you make decisions that are not appropriate. That's first thing I wanted to say. B, when you criticize someone, not for the sake of criticism, but just to criticize their acts, obviously you have some kind of respect to them. You have expectations from them. And then when you see that they didn't really follow your expectations, you criticize it. So immediately we need to understand that the basis for criticism is respect. Because I respect them so much and because I hold them in such a high esteem, I find a respectful way to criticize them. Okay, before I continue on, I think Phil, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I raised my hand because Abraham didn't have a good lawyer. If he had said, thank you, God, when is this going to happen? Would that have been up to courses?
Phil, I missed the last sentence.
If Abraham, instead of saying my Edah, how do I know you'll do it? I'd say, the Border Shalom, when will you do it? Is that what would have happened? You wouldn't have had this problem. You did a better
I don't
lawyer.
know. I don't know.
Isn't that
Good
what's
question.
missing? Isn't that what's missing in the story? When will you do it? We have the same thing through Jewish history. Yes, God protects us. When? And there are so many people who say, yes, God protects us, but in his own way. Wonder tells you a lot. Second World War.
I don't know. Your question is good. I don't know what's the answer for that. If Avram would say just when instead of how,
Yeah.
if he was punished or not, I don't know. Maybe God will tell him it will come when it will come. Don't ask me questions like that. I don't know.
So God would tell him that it's a proper answer. But it's a normal question. If I say to you, I'm going to give you $1 million, what would you say?
Yeah.
When?
Thank you very much. When? Right?
That's right.
Yeah. I don't know. The question is bamakom.
Reach in some of these materials. The material is there. This is what happened, and for good or for bad, that's what happened. And then to look for a way of blaming Abraham for misspeaking. So because he said when, and he did not say when, and for that Jews were punished for hundreds of years.
So still, the question of, as we said before, avot achlu boser v'shnei banim tikhena is definitely a question that we're not going to address today, but it is a question. That's A. B, maybe, and that's what I don't know, maybe the expectation was when Abraham heard, I'm going to give you the land, just to say thank you. Not when, not how, not nothing. Just say thank you. Trust God that he will bring it in the right time. Might be, I don't know, or might not. I agree with you. We can address and we can challenge and we can learn only the things that are in front of us, not the things that are not there. Yeah. In academia also, you cannot bring a proof for something that is missing. You can only bring a proof for something that exists. Okay, so we look at the narrative. In the narrative, Avram says, B'maeda, how would I know? And for that, according to the Midrash, he was punished. By the way, Phil, according to the Ramban, that's not the reason for the people to go down to Egypt. There was another sin.
Yeah,
so maybe according to the Ramban, that was not a problem that Avram asked, how would I know? I don't know. I think this is really a matter of interpretation. So now, if we don't have any more questions, let's go back to the source sheet. And let's see Rab Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Now, Rab Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, let me see if I have the English. No, okay. Rab Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, just a little bit of background. We're talking about 19th century scholar in Germany. He had to deal with the reform movement on one hand, The ultra-Orthodox, on the other hand, he was not, by the way, he was not a religious Zionist, okay? So first and foremost, he was not a religious Zionist. He was not modern Orthodox. He was Torah v'derech eretz. We will call him today, I guess, more of a yeshivish, modern, I don't know, whatever you're going to call him or define him. Everything is so fluid nowadays. So there's so much fluidity in terms of the definitions. So I don't know, whatever you're going to define him, but he definitely has an interesting perspective on life and reality. So he says the following, which is very, very important. He says, "Vayir ha'av ba'aretz," and it was a famine in the land. הסיפור הפותח במילים אלו, יש בו כדי להצמיע במבט ראשון. It says, this story, at the beginning, it seems to be very strange. אברהם עזב את הארץ היעודה, לא אברהם left the land that was promised to him, הוא לא בטח בהשם, הזן מפרנס גם בארץ צייה, he didn't trust God that he will sustain him, ונראים הדברים במבט ראשון, שהוא סיכן את שלומה המוסרי של אשתו כדי להחיות את נפשו. And it seems to be, at first glance, that he even endangered his own wife in order to save his own life. והנה, אפילו אין בידינו ליישב את כל התמיהות, אפילו נאלצנו לגזור כדעת רמב"ן ודעת כי אברהם אבינו חתך את גדול בשגגה שהביא את אשתו הצדקת במכשול עוון מפני פחדו פן יהרגו, גם יציאתו מן הארץ נצטווה עליה מפני הרעב עוון אשר חטא. הרי אין בכל זה כדי להביא אותנו במבוכה. So Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, first he creates the basis for the discussion. He says, I look at this story. Avram leaves the country that he was promised to get. Then he endangers his wife. Then the Ramban says that he committed a sin. How should we look at this story? That's our question. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, with tremendous honesty in terms of intellectually honest, he looks at the Midrash. And by the way, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch obviously wrote a very famous Perush on Chumash that he gave as a shiur in shul, a women's shiur, every Shabbat afternoon. And he asked himself, how can I read this story? How can I read this narrative and explain it? I have a problem. Avram did few things that we have an issue with. So what should we do? So says Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, אין התורה מציגה את גדולי ישראל כאידיאלים בתכלית השלמות. He says, we need to learn from you that the Torah does not portray our biblical heroes as the ideal people who are completely perfect. אין היא מעילה אדם, we do not idolize people. ואין היא אומרת על איש, הנה לפניי האידיאל, באדם זה הפך האלוהי לאדם. The Torah will never say, look at this person, he became God. He is flawless. בכלל, אין היא מציגה את חיי שום אדם כחיים לדוגמה ולמופת. No one in the Torah has life that the Torah says, כזה ראה וקדש. That's the way you need to live your life. למען נלמד ממנו מה טוב ומה ישר, מה נעשה ומה לא נעשה. אם התורה רוצה לצייר לנו, if the Torah wants to portray for us, דמות, an image, שנוכל ללמוד מדוגמתה, that the Torah wants us to learn from it, הרי אין היא מציגה בין אדם שיסודו מעפר ואפר. The Torah never, and you can check it, the Torah never portray a person that you need to be like him. אלא, הקדוש ברוך הוא מציג את עצמו לדוגמה, ואומר, הביטו אליי, עשו כמעשיי, לכו בדרכי. It always that the Torah says, you need to imitate whom? You need to imitate God. Exactly, not a person. לעולם אל נאמר, מעשה זהו טוב וישר שכן פלוני אלמוני עשה כן. We cannot say, oh, this act is good because Mr. So-and-so did it. התורה איננה אוסף של מעשים טובים. The Torah is not a collection of good deeds. היא מספרת מעשים שהיו. The Torah relates events that took place, לא מפני שהם מעשים מופתיים, not because there are miracles or ideal actions, אלא מפני שהם מעשים שהיו, but because those are the facts. Still, you got someone to support you. אין התורה מעלימה את השגיאות. The Torah does not try to ignore or to be oblivious to mistakes. השגגות והחולשות של גדולי ישראל. the weaknesses, the faults of גדולי ישראל, ודווקא על ידי כך, and because of that, היא מטביעה על סיפוריה את חותם האמת. Because we are not trying to ignore the faults and the mistakes, it shows that the Torah is true. Because we all know there is no such a thing that someone lived all his life or her life and didn't do even one mistake. If the Torah will tell me that Abraham did 0 mistakes, I will look at the Torah and say, are you kidding me? This is totally not true. It's impossible. Therefore, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael here says, when you read a narrative and there is an issue there, yes, the rabbis will explain it and try to portray it maybe in a different way because of different reasons. But the fact itself that the narrative wrote something that criticized the hero or showed some kind of something that is not exactly complementary to that person, it shows that the Torah is what? Is true. Because in any other religion, you don't have criticism on the heroes that you are expected to respect from the Torah. This is what Rabbi Shimshon Raphael here says. And then he continues on and says the following. אולם, לאמיתו של דבר, the truth of the matter is ידיעת חטאם של גדולי ישראל, when you know that גדולי ישראל committed a sin, איננה מנמיכה את דמותם, does not reduce their image, it does not degrade their ideals, אלא להפך, דמותם גדולה ומאלפת, exactly the opposite. When I know that David HaMelech committed a sin, but after that he was able to repossess his position, בעצם החטא שחטאו, אילו הזהירו כולם כזוהר רקיע ללא רבב, שמץ ופגם, היינו סבורים שטבעם שונה מטבענו, והוא למעלה מהישג ידינו, ללא תאווה וללא מאבק פנימי, היו מידותיהם הטובות רק תוצאה מטבעם הנעלה. לא בזכותם קנו את מידותיהם, ואין הם יכולים להיות לנו למופת. He says, if you will tell me that they are flawless, so I will say that their nature is different than mine. And that's why they had such great traits. But me, because I am created differently, I will never be like them. Which means what the Rabbi Shimshon Raphael here says 2 things. First, when the Torah highlights the faults or the challenges that the heroes had, it basically shows that it's true. That's A. B, it also makes it more relatable to us. If you tell me you need to be like Superman, I will tell you, but I'm not Superman. Superman is being formed differently, is created differently, has totally different DNA and material. I'm not like that, so I will never be able to fly. But if you are telling me about someone who is like me and he was able to reach a higher level spiritually, I would say what? Oh, I definitely have a chance. This is the idea of Dafka showing the faults of our forefathers or any other biblical hero. And then he continues on, and he says, take for example, מידת הענווה של משה, Moshe's humility. אלמלא ידענו שהוא עלול גם לכעוס, היינו סבורים שמידת הענווה תבואה בו מלידה, ולא לנו ללמוד ממנה. He says, take Moshe's humility. If we would not know that Moshe is able also to be angry, we would say that Moshe was just a different person. He was always humble. He was always quiet. He was always nice. And therefore he was humble. But when I know that also Moshe could be angry, if he can be angry and at the same time he's so humble, I can learn from him. רק משעה שאמר שמעון האמורים, here or rebels, הרי במקום שנמצא את ענוותנותו, שם נמצא גדולתו. הוא קנה את הענווה ביגיעה רבה. Moshe was not born humble. He became a humble person. בשליטה עצמית, by self-restraint, ובעידון עצמי, and to make himself gentle, וכולנו מצווים להידמות אליו, שכן כולנו מסוגלים לכך. ואין התורה מספרת על חטא, אלא אם כן עונשו בצידו. Every time that the Torah specifies a sin of one of our biblical heroes, there's also a punishment. Why? To show that they were punished, and from this punishment they grew. That's what we need to learn from it. None of them was perfect, but they learned from their mistakes, most of them. נלמד מחכמי התורה הגדולים, והרמב"ן הוא בוודאי מן הגדולים שבהם. לעולם, and take a look at what he says here, which is so important. אין זה מתפקידנו ללמד סנגוריה על גדולי ישראל. We should not be the lawyers for our biblical figures, biblical heroes or the sages. אין הם זקוקים לסנגוריה שלנו. They don't need us to be their lawyers. ואין הם סובלים אותה. They don't need us to justify what they did. התורה חתומה בחותמת האמת. The Torah is signed and sealed with the signature of truth. ואמת היא קו יסוד של גדולי פרשניה ומוריה. And truth is the guiding line for every commentator. וכל זה אילו נאלצנו באמת לומר כדעת הרמב"ם, חטא אברהם אבינו בשגגה. So then he wants to explain, and that I'm not going to deal with it, how he explains the Ramban. But what I wanted to do is to go back to the Rasham here and to basically what he says is so contradictory to Rabbi Aaron Kotler. And he also found himself in a very turbulent time. But he said exactly the opposite. There is tremendous respect to the Gdolei Israel and to the biblical heroes. But the fact is that the Torah is Torah Temet. The Torah is the Torah of truth. And if the Torah said in the narrative itself, in a critical way, and criticize some of the biblical heroes, it shows that it's true. Every time you try to deviate from it, you're basically saying, oh, well, the Torah says it's not true. This is the truth. But that's sacrilegion by itself. Now, you will ask me, but Rabbi, we know in the Talmud that they always try to say, Kol ha'omer David chata eino ela to'eh. Everyone who says that David committed a sin is mistaken. Or if someone says that Reuven created a mistake, he is mistaken. The thing is that if you think, and that again goes back to what I said before, criticism is welcome. Disrespect is rejected. Meaning, some people have the notion or the tendency to say, oh, if Avraham chata, if Avraham committed a sin or David committed a sin, he is a terrible person. I'm not going to learn from him anything. He doesn't mean to me anything. That's not what criticism must lead. What criticism leads is to better yourself, to learn from their mistakes, and to show and to learn how they overcame their own mistakes. That's the purpose of criticism. Criticism for the sake of criticism and to degrade them, not welcomed. Criticism for the sake of learning, criticism for the sake of understanding what we shouldn't do, or alternatively, what we should do after we committed a sin, that's more than welcome. That's exactly what the Torah wants you to do. And the Torah portrays stories and conveys stories that shows you even Avraham committed such a sin, even David committed such a sin, even the Jewish people 40 days after receiving the Torah committed such a sin, and look, they were able to overcome it. They were able to grow from it. Therefore, when I go through such an experience, obviously, I can learn from them. So now I just want to end up with something that also was done after the Shoah. Rabbi Dessler, for Michtav Me'Eliyahu, Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, he obviously wanted to also, to some extent, to, how do you deal, especially when the Haredi community was just being formed again after the Shoah. So he had to deal with the issue of Chetei Gdolim. So he came up with something very innovative that I will, to some extent, disagree with, but it's very important. Now, I don't know how you do that. 1 second, how do I?
You can rotate it to the right.
To the right? Yeah, how do I do that? That's the question. Oh, here we go. I think I know. Yeah, got it. Okay. So he says the following. He says, so first and foremost, I just want to show you, חז"ל הקדושים, אשר דבקו באמיתת תורה יותר מכל בריאה, our holy sages, that they basically glued themselves to the truthfulness of the Torah from any other person, הם היחידים אשר זכו לחדור אל עומק דקדוקה והערכתה של תורה. They are the only ones who can tell you exactly what the Torah has to say. So obviously you understand that he basically says that the interpretation for the Torah belongs only to whom? To an elite group, not for everyone. It's not for the masses. So you already see the difference. ורק הם יכולים לגלות לנו על אופני ביטויי החרטים. And they are the only ones who are authorized to explain to us every expression in the Torah, even Torah criticism on the biblical heroes. So basically he says, he brings what I told you before, and then he says, one second, where it is? It's here. Okay. One second. Here. אלא ודאי שצריך לחפש את חטאם בהבחנת הכי דקות בלב לפי מדרגתם. So I don't have the time to read it to you, all of it. But basically, he creates the idea of silo shel guf, which means this is very innovative. I don't agree with it, but it's very innovative, so I wanted to share with you. He basically says that there is a biblical hero. He is pure, he is righteous, he is flawless. However, he has a cell. What is the cell? A shade. This shade is the one who did the transgression. It's almost like schizophrenia, okay? He splits the person into two. He says, the righteous tzaddik, the righteous Av, Avram himself never committed a sin. David HaMelech never committed a sin. There was some kind of like Mr. Hyde and Dr. What's it called? Mr. Jack and Dr. Hyde, or Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jack, whatever it is. There is like a little split, and the evil side of this person or personality committed that sin. What does he want to accomplish? He wants to accomplish that he doesn't really touch Avram, David, Reuven, Shmuel, whatever it is, but at the same time, he is not totally oblivious to the sin itself. That's why I told you it's very innovative, because he, and especially Rabbi Dessler, after the Shoah, he felt that he needs to strengthen the ideology of especially the Haredi Yeshivish movement, that he was definitely tremendous, an essential part of its reformation after the Shoah. And they felt, again, that they need to take charge on the Torah, which, by the way, started then. He also is one of the leading rabbis who believed and formed and coined the idea of a shiur that I gave on Shavuot in Shul, Da'at Teireh, Da'at Torah. He was one of the first ones to really develop it. Why? Because, again, don't forget, after the Shoah, tremendous crisis in faith. People lost their families. Some of them even blamed the rabbis for telling them to stay. And you had to repossess the trust, the faith in the rabbis, because if there is no faith in the rabbis, all religion can go down the hill. So basically, Rabbi Dessler was motivated by reforming this rabbinic elite, and he basically says the rabbinic elite has the only way to interpret difficult verses in the Torah, and I'm telling you that the way to look at chet, sin, transgressions of Gdolim, of biblical heroes, is by splitting the personality to some extent. David, Aaron, Moshe, Reuven, all of them are in their core, they are pure and righteous. Only their shade created this transgression. Now, as I said before, very innovative. For me, it's very hard to swallow. I understand exactly where he's coming from, but I still think that you can overcome the challenge in a different way. But that's my opinion. So what we saw, let me just make a sikkum. We started with the Rabbi Kotler in 1935, basically saying any criticism on the Avot and the Imaot, it's sacrilegion. You cannot bring it to your home, it's abomination. We saw Ramban, we saw the Midrash, we saw Rabbeinu Bachya, we saw Shai Hirsch. All of them says not only that you can, it shows that the Torah is true, and it shows some kind of a relatable issue. I can relate to those people because they are like me, but they are just much better version of me, and I can be a better version of myself. And then we saw Rabbi Dessler again after the Shoah. We see the need that he saw, that he must create again this authority and dominance really of the rabbis over the narrative in order to control the narrative, to control the messages, and not to allow anyone else to start tampering with the narrative and with Tanakh, because it can lead them to maybe challenging results. He was afraid of that. He was afraid. Baruch Hashem, 21st century, as you see, Baruch Hashem, Limud Tanakh, study of Tanakh becomes tremendous thing, and obviously one of the institutions that is definitely responsible for that is Yeshivat Agush and Machon Herzog. Definitely what they did with Limud Tanakh is incredible. I don't think that in 2,000 years of world of Torah, we have such tremendous amount of information, knowledge, understanding of Tanakh. And even with that, there was a very famous debate between Rav Meidan and Rav Avinera. And I think the title of that debate was Tanakh Begova Einayim, meaning teaching Tanakh in the height of your eyes, which means, how do I view biblical figures? How do I view stories in the Tanakh? Do I view them as like the event that took place yesterday on the street, or I see that in a different way, in a more spiritual way? And I will just tell you my opinion, and you can take it or leave it. It's not Torah Misinai, it's just Torah Mitzion, is to tell you that basically, I think that we should definitely learn how to criticize, how to understand what went wrong for the purpose of bettering ourselves, not to degrade anyone, not to diminish anyone, not to shake our faith, but it's to really to try to understand what was the issue, how they dealt with it, can I deal with it in a different way, and how can I better myself? If you do that, I think the criticism itself, A, will be more true to the issue, A, and B, I think will also make it again more relatable to us and definitely to our children. Our youth is obviously trained, expected to criticize, to challenge things. And if you tell them someone was flawless, and especially when they see on the news that no one's flawless, okay, and I'm saying no one in the entire spectrum, okay, it's not going to work. We have responsibility to transfer and to transmit Mesorah in the most emet way that we can. And to try to ignore, to be oblivious to issues, I don't think it's healthy. However, the way we deal with the issues should come from a deep respect and rooted respect to our biblical heroes, with the understanding that they will keep, look, you and I are not mentioned in the Tanakh. They are, okay? We are not part of the Avot, we are the Yeladim, okay? So we definitely have this tremendous mitzvah of respecting the biblical heroes, but at the same time, they are encouraging us to learn from their mistakes as well. And as Shimshon Lefan here says, and the lawyers on the screen should excuse me, they don't need lawyers, okay? They don't need lawyers for what they did. Baruch Hashem, they knew how to deal with it, and we should definitely learn from them. So that's for today. Everyone, just to remind everyone, tonight class is at 7:30 instead of 8, the Midrash class, and everyone is invited to the Mishmar in Shul if you want to come. Everyone, have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.